Hey people, this is my review of Captain America: The First Avenger and the final review of my superhero movie battle of 2011 video series. For those of you who don't know, I'm comparing Thor, X-Men First Class, Green Lantern, and Captain America to see which movie comes out on top for the year. After this video, I'm going to wait until after Captain America's final box office numbers come in, and then make a final comparison video of all the movies, comparing box office performance, critical reviews, and just a few other factors, as well as my own personal opinion, to declare a winner. This review is probably the most difficult one I've done so far, because it's been kind of hard for me to figure out exactly how I feel about this movie. Going into the summer, this was a superhero movie that I was most excited about. I saw the potential in the other ones, but this one felt a little bit more personal to me. Captain America is one of my top 4 favorite superheroes, so I had very high standards for a movie based on the character. I wanted to be wowed. Was I? I honestly can't say that I was. However, I do feel that this was a good movie and a very solid introduction to the character. Let's start out with the negative. There wasn't very much I disliked about this movie, just some things that I thought could have been stronger. I think my biggest disappointment was probably the action. It was pretty decent, but I thought it could have been very cool. Specifically, I thought that Captain America's hand-to-hand combat could have been better. They placed a lot of emphasis on his strength, but I wish they would have showcased his agility more, with more fast-paced, well-choreographed, and creatively choreographed fight scenes. Maybe with a little bit of well-used slow motion thrown in there from time to time. Near the middle of the movie, there's a montage that features Captain America and his team taking out Hydra bases, and it is supposed to represent a few years' worth of fighting experience for Steve. I don't disagree with the decision to put a montage in there to show that time has passed and give Steve more fighting experience, and really kind of show the length of time that Steve was fighting from the beginning when he becomes a super soldier to the end of the movie. However, my gripe is that this montage features a mixture of medium length to very brief clips. Some of these clips that had Captain America fighting looked like they were part of a big, cool action sequence when we saw them in the trailers and the TV spots, but in actuality were the entire segment of the montage. For example, there's a scene that I think was used in a lot of the advertisements that showed Captain America and his team running through the woods with explosions all around them, and I think this scene gave the impression to a lot of people, more than just myself, that it was part of a very big action sequence. And when you saw it in the movie, it was really just a brief clip of them running through the woods with explosions all around them, before moving on to the next decent yet brief action scene. Also, another scene that they used a lot was Captain America and his team bursting through the doors of some warehouse or something and starting to shoot. And that was also the entire segment that was in the montage. There was no more to it than that. It was just them bursting into this building. And of course they do something else, but we're not shown that because it rushes to the next little scene. For all of the faults of X-Men Origins Wolverine, I really liked the opening war montage that featured Wolverine and Sabretooth. Its scenes were longer, they were more intense and dramatic for the most part, and they transitioned very well, so it flowed together very nicely, and it was able to show a large expanse of time. So of course it would have been more difficult to do this in Captain America, given that these people aren't changing and it's the same war. So the looks of the people aren't changing, the looks of the places aren't changing, the weapons and everything. And I'm not saying that the movie should have copied this exactly, but maybe a montage more similar in feel and the length of the scenes to this would have been more effective. The final fight between Captain America and the Red Skull was probably the biggest disappointment in terms of the movie's action. It was just pretty forgettable, to be honest. I mean, we've got Captain America and the Red Skull. They're arch nemesis. They're both super soldiers in this movie. It should have been a pretty big, memorable fight scene. I'm no fight choreographer, but I think that they really could have done something more intense with it. Something more that felt that these were two very strong people fighting each other, and maybe two very skilled fighters. Captain America's been fighting for a few years now. The Red Skull must have been doing something to get to the point where he was, so he must have a bit of fighting skill. They could have drawn it out a little bit longer, and maybe not just kind of hit each other for a while and then it's over. There were also some scenes that stood out to me as a bit overly stylistic. For example, I didn't like the look of the scene in which the backstory of the Red Skull was told. I thought it was a little bit too cheesy. And there were some scenes in the montage, and as well as the climax, that looked like they weren't even trying to be realistic. I'm not talking about gritty realism. For example, in Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, while there's some intense CG going on with the characters, the world around Iron Man as he fights the Ironmonger is still supposed to be realistic looking, and it looks realistic, as well as the world around the Hulk as he fights the army or the Abomination. That world is still realistic. There were scenes in the montage, and you can compare this scene at the end where Captain America is running trying to catch the aircraft of the Red Skull to the scene where he's on his bike and the Hydra soldiers are chasing him. The scene where he's in the Red Skull's base looks a lot more artificial, and it's almost like they're from two completely different movies. My next complaint about the movie helps me to transition into what I liked about it. The simplest way to put it is that I wanted more. In regards to Captain America, IGN's Phil Perrello says Marvel's new movie is this close to being their best, and I really agree. If you've watched my review of Green Lantern, you know that I thought it was a very bad movie that could have been a great movie. I know its potential because I know the source material, but just by watching Green Lantern, it's not evident that it could have been a better movie given its writing and creative direction. Just by watching Captain America, I can tell that it could have been an incredible movie if, along with better action, the filmmakers gave us more of what they did well. And there are plenty of things that they did very well. It really feels kind of like they made the best Captain America movie possible within some kind of mandated time limit that didn't allow them to expand on some of the things that you can tell that they could have expanded on. For example, I really liked the dynamic between Steve and Bucky. However, aside from the scene in which Steve recruits his team, there's not that much shown between them after the shift in their relationship in which Steve becomes the stronger of the two. I think another scene between them with more dialogue would have been very welcome and a nice addition to the movie. There's a scene for the comics that I think would have worked well on several levels. It features Captain America giving a speech to a group of soldiers after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. After the speech, Bucky tells Steve how impressed he is with his ability to give a speech to these men who have watched their friends die and really move them and improve their morale. Steve tells him that he has to be able to do this kind of thing because he's only one of what was supposed to be an entire army of super soldiers, so that as Captain America he feels that he has to be good enough to make up for all of what should have been. I tweak this scene and close it out by having Bucky tell Steve that he doesn't have to carry this burden alone. Then to say something like, "We're in this together. Just because you're a super soldier now doesn't mean I don't have your back. I'll always have your back." I think this scene would have helped the movie out in several ways. It shows Captain America giving a speech and inspiring soldiers. It reveals to the audience the burden Steve feels in being the super soldier. It provides another scene that displays the closeness between Steve and Bucky, and Bucky's final comments would serve as a great setup to his death scene. I think that this scene would have really fit well in this movie, but there's still hope that it could be included in a flashback of a Winter Soldier sequel to Captain America, so fingers crossed on that one. I would have also liked to get more of a feel for Captain America's team. They really just kind of felt like background characters to me. In a movie like this that's so focused on one character, it's difficult to develop a lot of the characters in the story. So instead of trying to focus on doing each individual member of the team, maybe they could have just focused on the team dynamic more and showed that how they work together in combat and how they just kind of interact with each other outside of combat, more than the little bar scene they showed. Just kind of develop a sense of closeness between the team and how well they work together. I think they did a pretty great job with the Steve-Peggy romance. I really don't have any complaints there. It wasn't overdone and overly sappy, but at the same time it wasn't underdeveloped. It was just right. They really felt like two people who deserved to find each other, which I think is probably the saddest part about Steve getting frozen at the end of the movie, what it does to their relationship. I think that their doomed romance is probably the best love story in a superhero movie this summer, and I thought that the final scene between them talking over the radio to each other as Steve is about to crash land the aircraft was well done. I know there are some people who disagree with me on that, but I thought it was a good final thing between them for the movie. The acting was great all around. I have to give credit to Tommy Lee Jones and Stanley Tucci for bringing life to what could have been very forgettable roles. Hugo Weaving was sinister but not overly campy as the Red Skull. Sebastian Stan and Haley Atwell were both very likable as Bucky and Peggy Carter respectively. I think that Chris Evans really just kind of stole the show with this, and he did a great job. I remember when it was first announced that he was being considered for the role of Steve Rogers, and I remember thinking to myself, come on, Johnny Storm can't be Steve Rogers. For starters, it just felt weird. And for another thing, Chris Evans just seemed to be known for these very comedic, smart-ass Johnny Storm type characters, so he just seemed totally wrong for Captain America. Once he got the role, I decided to check him out in some of his more serious character roles in Street Kings and Sunshine, and I thought, okay, he might be able to pull this off. He didn't just pull it off, though. He owned it. I think that he was great throughout, but what really impressed me was his ability to play the brave and noble little guy. The effect of striking Chris Evans down was effective, but it's easy to forget that he was as big as super soldier Steve Rogers while he was playing skinny Steve. The effects wouldn't have been convincing if he wasn't able to play the little guy and act so well like he had a small, frail body. Chris brought to life everything about Steve Rogers that was in the script, which did a good job of developing the character. As I mentioned earlier, I think it would have greatly added to the movie to pay more attention to the burden of being the super soldier. For the Captain America comics that I've read, I feel that this burden, along with his harrowing experiences during the war, are very defining attributes of the character. Since Captain America the First Avenger leaves room for more of Steve's time in the war to be told through flashbacks, I believe there's the potential for more of these aspects of the character to be explored in a sequel or the Avengers movies. The important thing is that Chris Evans succeeded in bringing this character to life, and I look forward to seeing him reprise this role in the Avengers and in any potential Captain America sequels. I have kind of mixed feelings about the story of the movie. I do like the origin of Steve Rogers, and I think they pulled it off pretty well. However, by being familiar with the story of Captain America and some basic plot elements of the movie, there are very few surprises for me. Captain America is kind of in a difficult position, or you could look at it as a fortunate position of having like the whole movie mapped out for it. Most movies give you the beginning of where to start. Like if you know the origin, that's where you start, and then you can kind of go wherever you want with it. But with Captain America, the position that it is in, having to set up for his involvement in the Avengers, it had to end with him being frozen. So we know the beginning, we know the end, and the middle isn't that hard to figure out. But I imagine that it was more exciting and interesting to some extent for people less familiar with the story. I still found it to be an enjoyable story overall. If they had managed to deliver on the potential of the action of the movie and taken more time to explore some of the relationships and themes that they touched on in this movie, I think it's very possible that it could have been at the top of the list for the best superhero movies ever. Instead, it seems content on being a pretty good movie that doesn't really push any boundaries, but raises the standard of quality associated with superhero movies. So I give Captain America a B+. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe and tune in next time.